We begin with the unexpected death of Lisa Marie Presley. Mourners have been leaving flowers at the gates of Graceland, where just this past Sunday,
a long-lost letter from Elvis Presley to his daughter, Lisa Marie, has finally come to light. Locked away for decades in a sealed vault at the Presley estate. But this isn't just any letter. It's something far more personal. This letter, written in Elvis's own hand, reveals fears, regrets, and a side of him the world never truly saw. The details of this letter may change everything we thought we knew about the rock and roll legend. Let's dive in. A letter locked away. Until now, no one was ever supposed to read it. For nearly 50 years, a sealed vault sat untouched inside Graceland, the place where Elvis Presley lived, laughed, and died. Over time, it became a quiet corner of history, filled with old photos, stage costumes, handwritten notes, little pieces of a life once lived in the spotlight. But recently, something unexpected happened. A team working to organize and digitize the Presley family archives opened the vault. Just another routine project, they thought, until they found it. Tucked inside an old leather folder marked "Private" for Lisa only was a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Elvis's, and the name on the envelope, Lisa Marie. Nobody knew it existed. Not Lisa, not Priscilla, no one. The letter was dated sometime in early 1977, only months before Elvis passed away. Yellowed with age, the paper had been folded neatly, as if someone had carefully placed it there for safekeeping, maybe even hoping it would never be found. There was no media frenzy, no big headlines, just quiet shock among the few who saw it first. And when Priscilla Presley read it, people close to her say she cried, not just because of what it said, but because it felt like hearing Elvis's voice again after all these years. What's in the letter? It's hard to put into words. It's not just a note from a father to a daughter. It's something more. It reads like a goodbye, like a man trying to say what he couldn't face saying out loud. He wrote about being scared, about feeling lost, about missing moments with Lisa that he'd never get back. He talked about love, the deep kind, the kind that hurts, and he shared something he'd never told anyone before. We've always known Elvis as the king, the voice, the stage presence, the legend. But this letter, it shows the man, the one behind the fame, the one who was tired, worried, full of regret. It's the Elvis nobody ever got to see. And maybe that's why it stayed hidden for so long. But now, after all these years in the dark, the letter has come to light. And what does it reveal? You'd have to keep watching to find out. But first, let's take a closer look at the bond he shared with Lisa Marie and how this letter may be the truest thing he ever left behind. Elvis and Lisa Marie, a complicated bond. Most people knew him as the king of rock and roll, the legend, the icon, the man who changed music forever. But for one little girl, he was just dad. Lisa Marie Presley. She was the only child Elvis ever had, and though the world adored him, it was Lisa who saw a different side. The tender, silly, deeply emotional man who could be larger than life one minute and heartbreakingly human the next. But here's the thing. They only had 9 short years together before he was gone. Elvis died in August of 1977, when Lisa Marie was just 9 years old. And yet, even as an adult, she never stopped talking about him. She once said, "He was the most incredible, enigmatic, powerful, dynamic human being I've ever met." That's how she remembered him, not just as a superstar, but as someone who felt larger than life, even in quiet moments. Lisa's early years were spent at Graceland, that famous Memphis mansion that felt more like a wonderland than a home. She had her own golf cart, ran through the halls with her cousins, and would sometimes sneak into the jungle room where Elvis liked to relax. Can you imagine being a little girl and watching your dad rehearse in his living room? The same dad the world was worshipping on magazine covers and television screens? But Lisa's life wasn't as simple as it seemed. Being the daughter of two famous people came with a price. She was born on February 1st, 1968, just 9 months after Elvis and Priscilla tied the knot in Las Vegas. From the outside, their marriage looked like a fairy tale. But the truth? It was rocky from the start. Even before Lisa was born, things were tense. Priscilla later admitted she was scared, unsure if she was ready to become a mother. At one point, she even thought about ending the pregnancy. That's not the part of the story people like to talk about. But it's real, and it gives you a sense of how fragile things already were before Lisa ever came into the world. Still, when she arrived, everything changed, for a while at least. Elvis adored her. Priscilla once said that Elvis would come home late from a show, still in his jumpsuit, and tiptoe into Lisa's room just to kiss her goodnight. He spoiled her endlessly. Stuffed animals, toy pianos, you name it. But more than anything, he gave her time. And maybe that's what she remembered most. But not all memories are happy ones. As Lisa grew older, she became aware of the cracks. Elvis wasn't always present. He toured constantly. He struggled with health issues, prescription substances, and the pressure of staying on top. By the time Lisa was 5, her parents divorced. She was shuttled between households, between two very different worlds, her mom's in Los Angeles and her dad's in Memphis. Lisa once said that even as a child, she knew her dad was battling something heavy. And maybe that's why they were so close. Because even though Elvis had a hard time opening up to adults, he could let his guard down with her. She was his safe place. And for Lisa, those days at Graceland, as chaotic and unpredictable as they were, became the most peaceful memories of her life. After Elvis died, everything changed. Lisa was left with his name, his legacy, and a hole in her heart that never really healed. She spent the rest of her life trying to figure out who she was, beyond the Presley name, beyond the headlines, beyond the shadow of her father. So when that letter surfaced, the one Elvis wrote but never gave her, it felt like a missing piece, like he was reaching out from the past to say all the things he couldn't say in life. Lisa's birth changed everything between Elvis and Priscilla. By the time Lisa Marie Presley came into the world on a chilly day in February of 1968, Elvis and Priscilla Presley were already walking on shaky ground, even if the world didn't see it yet. From the outside, it looked like a fairy tale. The king of rock and roll married to a stunning young woman, living in a mansion, and now welcoming their first child. But behind closed doors, things were complicated. Priscilla later admitted in interviews and in her memoir that she felt incredibly alone during her pregnancy. Elvis had changed, not just as a husband, but as a man. There were whispers, some loud, some quiet, that Elvis had been thinking of ending the marriage before Lisa was even born. Can you imagine that kind of uncertainty? Being 8 months pregnant and wondering if your husband was going to stay? And then there was this uncomfortable truth. Elvis reportedly struggled with seeing Priscilla as both the mother of his child and as a romantic partner. It's not something people like to talk about, but it had a real impact on their intimacy. According to Priscilla, once she became a mother, Elvis no longer desired her in the same way. To him, it seemed, women were either pure and maternal or exciting and seductive, but not both. That shift in how he saw her created a silent wall between them. And what about Elvis's faithfulness? Well, it's no secret that he had a wandering eye. One name that kept popping up during that time was Nancy Sinatra, daughter of Frank Sinatra. Nancy later recalled that Elvis called her shortly after Lisa was born, telling her how deeply moved he was by the whole experience of becoming a father. He said it had changed him, and maybe in some ways it did, but the cracks in his marriage were only growing wider. Elvis and Priscilla stayed together for a few more years, but the emotional distance kept increasing. Their love had once burned bright, but now it was flickering. Lisa's birth may have brought them joy, but it also marked the beginning of the end for their romantic bond. Still, when it came to Lisa Marie herself, there was no hesitation. Elvis adored her. She was his pride and joy. He never had any more children. All of his attention went to Lisa. He spoiled her, no doubt about it. If she wanted something, she got it. One of the most talked about stories from her childhood was when Elvis flew her to Idaho just so she could see snow for the first time. And not for a weekend, for 30 minutes. He rented a private jet, flew her to the snowy mountains, let her play for a bit, and then flew her right back home to Memphis. "Daddy just wanted me to see the snow," Lisa later said. "I just knew he was crazy about me, and that was how he showed it." He wasn't always around, especially in those late 1960s and early 1970s, when his career had caught fire again. The television comeback special in 1968, the Las Vegas residencies, the tours, it all meant more time away from home. But when he was home, he tried to make up for it. Priscilla once said that Elvis wasn't really the kind of father who changed diapers or did bedtime routines, but he had his own way of bonding with Lisa. He'd sing to her, let her try on his sunglasses, or touch the rhinestones on his jumpsuits before shows. She got the first peek at his stage outfits, like a little backstage pass just for her. And she could get away with anything. "No rules," Lisa once laughed in an interview. "I loved it. Anything I wanted, I just had to ask." She was the apple of his eye, and she knew it. But even as Elvis showered his daughter with love and gifts, his world was changing fast. Fame was still there, but the weight of it, the pressure, the loneliness, the health struggles, was beginning to show. As Lisa got older, she would come to understand just how heavy that crown had become for her father. And in his final days, that weight would nearly crush him. Elvis's final days, a lonely descent behind the gates of Graceland. By the time the summer of 1977 rolled around, Elvis Presley was not the same man the world had fallen in love with 2 decades earlier. He was no longer that young, swivel-hipped heartthrob who turned music upside down and made girls scream just by walking into a room. No, the Elvis who lived out his final days behind the tall gates of Graceland was tired, sick, and, though it may be hard to believe, deeply lonely. Elvis had built Graceland to be a place of comfort, a retreat from the flashing bulbs and non-stop attention that came with being the king. But toward the end of his life, it became more like a cage. Sure, he still had people around him, his staff, a few close friends, and Ginger Alden, his young girlfriend, but the house had lost its warmth. The laughter had faded. The music that once filled its rooms had gone quiet. Elvis, despite all the people in his life, was often by himself. The biggest shift had come years earlier, after his marriage to Priscilla ended. They officially split in the early 1970s, and even though they remained close for Lisa Marie's sake, Elvis never truly recovered from the heartbreak. Priscilla had been with him from the early days, before the fame got too big to handle. Losing her felt like losing a piece of his own identity. After the divorce, he jumped into relationships, but none of them stuck. Ginger Alden was the last in a long line, but even she admitted later that it was hard to get close to him in those final months. Physically, Elvis was in rough shape. He was only 42 years old, but he looked much older. His face was puffy, his skin had lost its glow, and he often struggled just to walk without being winded. He had put on a lot of weight, which made moving around difficult. Behind closed doors, he battled a list of health problems: high blood pressure, liver damage, an enlarged colon, and even glaucoma that affected his eyesight. He was constantly in and out of hospitals, but he hated being seen as weak. So he kept most of it hidden, even from the people closest to him. One of the saddest parts of Elvis's decline was how much he depended on prescription pills. In those days, it wasn't unusual for celebrities to lean on doctor's orders to cope with the pressure. And Elvis had more pressure than most. But what started as help for sleeping and anxiety turned into a dangerous cycle. There were pills to wake him up, pills to help him sleep, pills to calm his nerves, and pills to numb the pain. He didn't think of himself as an addict. He thought he was doing what he needed to keep going, but the toll was undeniable. People around him noticed he was often foggy or short-tempered. His longtime friend and bodyguard, Joe Esposito, later shared how Elvis would sometimes lose his train of thought mid-sentence or forget things he had just said. His speech was slower, and his movements were sluggish. He was, in many ways, a man trapped inside his own body. Still, there were flashes of the old Elvis, especially when he was with his daughter, Lisa Marie. She was just a young girl back then, full of energy and curiosity. And despite everything going on with his health, Elvis adored her. She was the light in his life, the one person who could always make him smile. He named a jet after her, the Lisa Marie, and let her roam around Graceland as if it were her personal playground. There were no rules when it came to Lisa. If she wanted ice cream for breakfast, she got it. If she wanted to stay up late watching movies, he'd stay up with her. But even Lisa noticed that her dad wasn't doing well. In later interviews, she talked about how he would come into her room looking confused or dizzy. Once, she even caught him mid-fall and had to hold him up. She didn't fully understand what was happening at the time, but she felt the fear. She'd ask him, "Daddy, are you okay? Are you going to die?" Those are hard questions for any child to ask, let alone one who sees her father, her hero, slipping away right before her eyes. Elvis tried to shield her from the worst of it. He still sang to her. He still gave her little gifts and told her stories. But the truth was, he was running on fumes. His shows were getting more unpredictable. Some nights, he could barely finish a performance. His fans, loyal as ever, still showed up in droves, but those close to him knew something wasn't right. He wasn't the Elvis of the 50s or 60s anymore. He was tired, bone-tired. And then there were his writings. Not many people know this, but toward the end, Elvis started writing down his thoughts. They weren't songs or movie scripts. They were simple things. Prayers, notes, little reflections he scribbled on paper or in books around the house. Some were about his fears. Others were about God or the Bible, topics that had always fascinated him. Joe Esposito once said that Elvis would sometimes sit in his room for hours, just writing quietly. Maybe it was his way of trying to understand himself. Maybe he just needed to talk to someone, even if it was only a blank page. He also wrote about regrets, the divorce, the missed chances, the way fame had taken over his life. He wrote about wanting to be better, for Lisa, for himself. He knew he was falling apart, and in those writings, you could feel that he was still holding on to hope, even if just barely. Then came that fateful morning, August 16th, 1977. Ginger Alden found him collapsed on the bathroom floor. The official cause of death was cardiac arrest. But everyone who knew him understood the real story. His heart gave out. Yes, but it was everything else that had worn him down. The pills, the pressure, the loneliness. It had all added up. Elvis Presley died in the very home he had built to protect himself from the outside world. But in the end, it couldn't protect him from himself. The world lost a legend that day, and Lisa Marie lost her father. And that's when the story shifts, from the king to the little girl left behind. Lisa Marie's own journey, her reflections, and the legacy she struggled to carry. Because the end of Elvis's life was only the beginning of a different kind of story. Lisa Marie's honest reflection and the letter that was locked away. Lisa Marie Presley was only 9 years old when the world lost Elvis. But she wasn't just hearing about it from the news or the radio. She was there, right there inside Graceland, when it happened. She didn't talk about that day often. For a long time, it was too heavy, too personal. But in one rare interview, she shared a quiet, heartbreaking memory, one that stayed with her all her life. It was sometime in the early hours of August 16th, 1977. Lisa was still awake. Maybe she had trouble sleeping that night. Maybe it was just fate. Either way, she was up when her father came home. Elvis was just 42, but by then, his body was tired and his spirit was worn. Still, he smiled at her, kissed her goodnight, and told her to go to bed. That simple moment, just a kiss, a few words, became the last time she ever saw him alive. Lisa remembered the hours that followed with a kind of foggy pain. She stayed close to her father's body for as long as it remained at Graceland. It was her way of holding on, of trying to understand something no child should ever have to face. On the day of the public viewing, she did something out of character. She sneaked off to smoke a cigarette, something she'd never done before. Maybe it was rebellion, maybe it was shock, maybe it was just her young mind trying to grasp the weight of it all. The world saw Elvis as a legend, a superstar. But Lisa saw him simply as Dad. Losing him wasn't just sad, it shook the ground under her feet. And from that day forward, her life would never be the same. Growing up Presley wasn't easy. Sure, there were the perks, the fame, the travel, the opportunities, but there was also the crushing pressure of living in someone else's giant shadow. And not just anyone's. She was the only child of the king of rock and roll. Imagine carrying that last name into every room, every conversation, every expectation. Lisa once said in an interview, "I'm not him. I could never be like him, and I don't want to try." That was her way of setting the record straight. She loved her father, but she wasn't going to pretend to be him. She had her own voice, her own battles, her own story. Still, people kept comparing. After one of her early concerts, a newspaper wrote, "Not bad, not her dad." That stung, not because she wanted to be Elvis, but because it reminded her she'd always be judged by a standard she never asked for. Despite being surrounded by music her whole life, Lisa didn't rush into the spotlight. In fact, she waited until her mid-20s before seriously stepping into a music career. When she finally did, her first single, Lights Out, was filled with raw emotion. It spoke about death, about feeling haunted, and even referenced Graceland. In one line, she sang, "Someone turned the lights out there in Memphis. That's where my family's buried and gone." That wasn't just a song lyric. It was her truth. But there's something else, a piece of the story that had been locked away for years, a letter, one that no one outside the Presley family ever knew about until recently. It was discovered in a sealed box inside the estate's vaults, tucked away like a forgotten secret. The paper had yellowed with age, and the handwriting, Elvis's unmistakable scrawl, had faded in spots. It wasn't addressed to a fan. It wasn't even meant for the public. It was a personal note to Lisa. Now, to be clear, there's still debate about this letter. Some people close to the estate believe it's genuine. Others aren't so sure. What's agreed on, though, is that it sounds like Elvis, and it reveals something deeper than we've seen before. In the letter, Elvis reportedly shared thoughts he never said out loud. He spoke of being tired, not just physically, but spiritually. He wrote about the weight of fame and how hard it had become to be Elvis Presley all the time. He worried about Lisa's future, how she'd grow up in a world that might not always be kind to her. He said he hoped she'd find peace, love, and something real to hold on to. He admitted he had regrets about his marriage, about things he wished he'd done differently, and he closed the note with a line that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. "No matter what they say about me, always remember, you were the one thing I got right." That one sentence, simple as it was, spoke volumes. Whether the letter was ever meant to be read is unclear. Maybe Elvis wrote it and never sent it. Maybe he was planning to give it to her one day. Maybe he just needed to write it down for himself. But reading it now, all these years later, it adds a new layer to who he was in those final months. A man who was scared, honest, and still full of love for his little girl. Lisa Marie carried the weight of that love and that loss with her for the rest of her life. Her music, her interviews, even her quiet moments all carried echoes of that one summer morning when everything changed. And while the world remembers Elvis for the music, the movies, and the jumpsuits, Lisa remembered the man who kissed her goodnight, the man who made her laugh, the man who, despite all his flaws, was just trying to hold on. But Lisa wasn't the only one deeply affected by his passing. There was someone else, someone who had known him even longer, a woman who shared his rise, his fall, and a bond that never truly broke. Priscilla's reaction. He never got to say these things to her. When the letter to Lisa Marie was finally uncovered, tucked away for decades in a sealed estate vault, there was only one person left who truly knew what those words might have meant: Priscilla Presley. Now in her late 70s, Priscilla has lived through every season of Elvis's legacy. She was there when it was all beginning, and she's still here long after it all ended. And though their marriage lasted only 6 years, their bond never truly broke. They first met when she was just a teenager living in Germany, and he was serving in the military. What began as an unlikely friendship turned into a romance that weathered the highs and lows of fame, family, and personal struggle. By the time they married in Las Vegas in 1967, Elvis was already a global icon. But to Priscilla, he wasn't just Elvis the King. He was the man who missed his mother, feared being drafted, and often felt alone, even in the spotlight. "He poured his heart out to me," Priscilla once said during a candid interview with the Today Show's Richard Wilkins. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried the weight of memories. She described how, behind closed doors, Elvis wasn't the man in the jumpsuit or the polished movie star millions knew. He was just a man, often vulnerable, often in pain. "I didn't see him as this movie star," she explained. "I saw him at probably one of the most vulnerable times in his life. Losing his mother, and then, of course, being drafted, that was devastating for him." Her words echo something deeper, something personal that often gets lost in the spotlight. Elvis never fully recovered from losing his mother, Gladys, in 1958. She was the one person he felt truly understood him, and when she passed, something in him changed. Priscilla noticed it. So did his closest friends. That hole in his heart never closed. So when news of the letter came out, a letter Elvis may have written to Lisa Marie before his death, Priscilla's reaction wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, reflective, bittersweet. She reportedly said, "He never got to say these things to her, but maybe this was his way." For Priscilla, the letter wasn't just a few lines scribbled on paper. It was a glimpse into a side of Elvis that the world rarely saw, but that she knew well. The man who wrote about being tired. The man who worried about his daughter's future. The man who wondered if he had done enough. Over the years, Priscilla has spoken openly about how much Elvis adored Lisa Marie. "He was so proud to be a dad," she said in past interviews. "She was the light of his life." She once recalled how Elvis would get down on the floor to play with Lisa, sing to her, and even do silly voices just to make her laugh. In those moments, he wasn't thinking about being Elvis Presley. He was just being dad. That's what made the contents of the letter so gut-wrenching. It wasn't full of showbiz talk. It was full of love, regret, and hope, things he struggled to say out loud. Reading it now, all these years later, Priscilla couldn't help but wonder. If Elvis had lived just a little longer, would he have finally said those things to Lisa face to face? "It's hard," she admitted in a private conversation. "When you know someone's heart and you read something like this, it just takes you back." But Priscilla's reaction wasn't only about grief. It was also about understanding. She had known for years that Elvis was carrying those feelings inside him. Now, the letter simply made them visible. For Priscilla, the letter may have served as a kind of closure, or maybe a small gift, something that brought her back to the man she once loved and the father he always wanted to be. Still, there's a bigger question lingering in the air. If this letter really was meant for Lisa, why didn't he give it to her? Was he waiting for the right moment? Was he afraid she wouldn't understand? Or was it just one of those things we put off, thinking there is always more time? No one can say for sure. But what we do know is that time ran out too soon. And that's something Priscilla, Lisa, and the entire Presley family have had to live with for decades. And now, as this lost letter comes to light, another mystery stirs within Graceland's walls. Because the estate holds more than just furniture and photographs, it holds secrets. And one of them may be tied to something Elvis feared the most. Thanks for watching, fam. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. While you're still here, check out the next video that pops up on your screen.